Good day. Star Wars was once a colossus that sat astride all aspects of popular culture. It was like a warrior of the ancient sagas. There was nothing it could not do. There was not one aspect of popular culture that it did not touch and improve. Today, in the grim cyberpunk dystopia that is 2024, Star Wars has fallen due to the machinations of the fell forces of Disney. Now, all across the cyberpunk landscape of social media, it is said that Star Wars was never good, and thus we should simply accept the inferior products put out before us, and then get excited for the next product. I shall say nay! We shall not simply accept this travesty, and thus today I shall declare that Star Wars was good, and today what we have is bad. First, we must accept that Star Wars was not wholly a product of George Lucas. It was instead a product of multiple writers, designers, and artists. George may have been the team captain, but it was the rest of the players that won the trophy of greatest of all time. With that in mind, it was thanks to George's vision that Star Wars was maintained. When he left the franchise, that's when it got terrible. When George kept tight control over the franchise, it flourished and grew. It maintained its quality due to his vision. Other writers would come to him with ideas, and he could and would veto them if they were terrible. Star Wars was so good, not because of some ephemeral quality, but instead it was a product of high standards. The first such quality standard for expanded Star Wars works was the style guide created by West End Games. West End Games was the company that created the Star Wars pen and paper role-playing game, and it was thanks to its supplements and concepts and ideas that the early Star Wars Expanded Universe content was so good and consistent. Today, we are going to go through selected extracts of the West End Game style guide to show just how and why Star Wars was good and illustrate why Disney Star Wars is so bad. So with that, let us begin. Alright, in the West End Game style guide, Chapter 3 is titled Writing in the Star Wars Universe. It is said that Star Wars writers must write with the same tone, spirit, and atmosphere as the Star Wars movies. They must be consistent with what has been done in the universe in the past, including game products, novels, and comics. This is very important because if each work feels like it's set in a separate universe, you won't have a unified whole. With Star Wars back in the 90s and early 2000s, you could pick up just about any Star Wars product and you would expect it to have at least some quality to it. One of the aspects of Disney Wars that really lets everybody down is the fact that the writing is very, shall we say, young adult. The West End Game Style Guide addresses this. No juvenile writing. A lot of authors write for an audience composed exclusively of 12-year-olds. We expect that writing is done in a serious, exciting, original, and interesting way. Don't be redundant, condescending, or simplistic. Your audience is a group of highly intelligent high school, college, and older age individuals. This is an important concept. Star Wars was not made for ma-childrens. Instead, it was simply made, and it appealed to children. Fred Rogers, aka Mr. Rogers, was of the belief that you should not talk down to children, and instead you should raise them up. Star Wars raised up many fans, and it was something that people of younger ages could get into because it was interesting to them. When you dumb something down, the average kid isn't going to really like it as much. I should know because I remember when I was a kid, I didn't really like the stuff that was supposed to appeal to my age bracket. I got into Star Wars when I was like 8 years old. The very first Star Wars novel I ever read was I, Jedi, and that came out in 1998, and I got a copy of that book from a grocery store checkout line. Yes, Star Wars was that big in the 90s that the books were sold right at the grocery store checkout, and I loved it. Now, one of the important aspects of Star Wars is that it basically occupied an interesting middle ground between young adult and full adult. Essentially, it was PG and PG-13. The Star Wars universe is a PG and PG-13 universe. Profanity should be limited to hell and damn. This is important because that allows your universe to be very classy. If people are letting off F-bombs left and right, they sound like they're in a bloody high school. Now, Star Wars also had their own equivalents to swear words such as stang, which I'm glad they didn't use all that much in the original EU, because fake swear words are almost as bad as real swear words. One of the sad aspects of modern Star Wars is there's much more violence despite the writing quality being much more lower. The West End Game Style Guide says that we should see very little blood and only in very dramatic situations, and no extreme violence. We should see no nudity. Sexuality is a topic best left undiscussed. Romance in a traditional non-graphical nature is acceptable. Star Wars is meant to be fun. We don't need to see Leia's sweet jubblies because that's not what she's there to do. She's there to shoot stormtroopers and not be afraid of anything. We don't really need to see somebody's head come clean off with a bunch of blood spurting out because that's not what Star Wars is trying to be. It's trying to be fun, and it's kind of hard to be fun when you have ultra-violence. One of the reasons why the early Schwarzenegger films were so great is because they were fun, silly violence. You didn't see Schwarzenegger literally just gutting somebody and strangling them with their own small intestines. Instead, you'd see Schwarzenegger blowing somebody up and they would randomly turn into a dummy. It was fun. And that's the aspect of Star Wars. You can have fun and you can have seriousness juxtaposed. We don't need to see Luke cutting open Darth Vader and ripping out his robo-intestines and then strangling with him. That just would not really work with the overall tone. This also ties into the West End Game Style Guide saying that potentially disturbing situations such as torture should be faded out, just as when Darth Vader interrogates Princess Leia in Star Wars. We know what's going to happen and the camera doesn't have to show us to get the dramatic impact. That's one of the things. What you don't see is more important than what you do see. You know what's going to happen. Do we need to hear Leia screaming in pain? Wouldn't that kind of take away the whole fun aspect of the movie? Don't make fun of Star Wars. Material may not make fun of the Star Wars universe. You may certainly present humor from the point of view of a character or humor inherent in a certain situation, but you may not make fun or be degrading of the Star Wars universe. Have fun with Star Wars instead. Oh my God, these people got it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're writing in an established universe, you should not mock what has come before. You should not belittle what has come before. This is the universe that's paying your bloody bills, and I'm glad that the West End Game Style Guide illustrates this. The Style Guide continues saying, use the Star Wars setting. Uh-oh. The Star Wars universe is a lot more than the Rebels versus the Empire. Uh-oh. There are independent companies, hostile bounty hunters, intelligent aliens, and so forth. When creating plots and villains and settings, use this setting to its utmost. Remember, it's a big galaxy out there, and you can help fill it, if what you create fits existing material and has the Star Wars feel to it. Oh dearie me. So yeah, no stupid world between worlds or those goddamn space whales. The Style Guide continues by saying, the largeness of scale must have context. You may not create something that's too big, powerful, or destructive. And it says the Empire would have taken control of it, like the stupid space whales. And the guide is saying you shouldn't have an unrealistically large megacorp that would have rivaled the Empire for power, because then that would diminish the Empire. Something that modern Disney Wars also doesn't understand. Writing in the New Republic. The era of the New Republic is an era of decay. The Empire has steadily lost ground and it has fragmented into many factions. However, the Republic isn't all that much better off. Constant infighting prevents the Republic from making any real gains, and the economy has stagnated. Credits, weapons, and ships are scarce. By the events of Heir to the Empire, the New Republic is barely maintaining power. Oh dear, ladies and gentlemen. So, yeah, probably shouldn't be getting rid of their fleet like in Disney Wars. This is something that I absolutely love about what West End Games was going for. This was an era where all sorts of imaginative adventures could be taking place because it was an era of chaos. By making the New Republic just, everything's fine now, really diminished what Disney Wars could have showed. Now, one of the most important aspects of this style guide is minimize real-world references. Oh my good God, have I come to hate just about every modern fictional franchise because they constantly have real-world references. The West End Style Guide says, since we are trying to maintain the Star Wars universe as an independent fictional universe, do not use real-world references unless absolutely necessary. Limit references to objects that could conceivably exist in the universe, such as in the Timothy Zahn novels, cigarettes, hot chocolate, and tea. When you want to refer to a specific type of technology, you can refer to it with a synonym. For instance, walkie-talkies or comlinks, video phones or vidcoms, cars or ground transports. Never use references to real-world locations, events, or people. Don't draw comparisons to fictional characters, celebrities, and so forth. Never use the names of other people's trademarks. Yeah, I don't know how much more I can put to that. The idea that Star Wars should somehow have ties to our world and we should use our world as a template for what happens in that universe, yeah, it takes you completely out of the immersion that that universe is supposed to create. Now, this is something else that Disney can't do. Create real and illogical characters. Star Wars is a real universe. Star Wars is more than good guys versus bad guys. People in the Star Wars universe are real people with real motivations, goals, faults, and weaknesses. Uh-oh. Create three-dimensional, interesting, complex characters with depth. People have real motivations, just like people in our real world. They don't do things without reason. People are good and evil, and many have high and lofty ideals, but many also have realistic motives. The Empire is evil, but let's see some realistic evil. The Empire is trying to control people and maintain power. They're not going to execute people unless they think it will get them something. The citizens of the Empire are more often than not just folks who don't realize how evil the Empire can be because it never affects them personally. Uh-oh! The Empire has a great deal of control of information, so most of the time people don't hear about atrocities on backwater worlds. In the Empire proper, no one is going to think about revolting against what they perceived as not perfect but could be worse government. Besides, if someone does hear about an atrocity, they'll figure the victims were criminals and rabble-rousers who deserve what they got. It's not that people don't care, but they, like lots of, and this is what the Western Style Guide says, Americans choose not to get involved. Now I want to point out that's the only political thing we've gotten to at any point in this style guide. And everything they're saying is right. Most people don't want to get involved. In today's social media world, this might seem a bit odd. But when you post something on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, that's not really getting involved. It's just putting out something that few people are going to watch or care about. The Empire in Disney Wars is evil with a capital E. And makes no logical sense. The characters that fight for the Empire have very little impetus to do so, and thus it cheapens the whole faction. Uh-oh, the next thing is even worse than what I just said. Be logical, be consistent, and do your research. Be internally consistent! Authors often contradict themselves in their own writing. If a character is a really good bounty hunter, then he should act like one and not make juvenile mistakes. If you're putting a military base on a world, ask yourself, why was it put here in the first place? I don't think the writers for Obi-Wan Kenobi did that. It is not very believable to have a hidden pirate base in the heart of a highly populated system. Think things through logically. Do your homework. Uh-oh, if you're inventing a new world that's really unusual, call up an astrophysics professor at a local university to see if it's plausible. Oh dear, I don't even know where to start on that. That's one of the reasons why Star Wars was so great, is that it felt like it could be real, that many of the aspects of the show and books and comics were plausible. This is one of those things that's very important. It has to be plausible, but it doesn't have to be 100% realistic, and realism shouldn't get in the way of a good story. But with that in mind, a good story shouldn't be so unrealistic as to take you out of the immersion. The segment goes on to say, think new planets through. We had too many worlds that are too much like Earth, or there is one settlement and the rest is wilderness. Uh-oh. This is fine once in a while, but it seems that every planet in the galaxy is like that. Developed worlds with unique cultures, industries, and attitudes, and so forth. If a planet has been settled for thousands of years, it should have some amazing architecture, huge monuments, and other things that make anything on Earth look downright piddly. These planets should not have a hyperloop, which would be vastly more primitive in the Star Wars universe than it is here. Think big. Don't underestimate the size and scope of the galaxy. There's a galaxy of billions of stars with a hyperspace-linked culture that has been around for over 20,000 years. There is room for an astounding amount of diversity. Likewise, oh man, this is where it's going to get bad, ladies and gentlemen. Likewise, not everything or everyone should be from Tatooine or Bespin. You know what? We didn't actually get Bespin in any of these goddamn Disney War shows, but we never even left Tatooine. It is a universe of neat gadgets, cool aliens, mystery, and a hint of magic. Espionage, military scenarios, Indiana Jones in space! And it's basically saying that just about anything can fit in Star Wars if done properly. Not just space westerns on Tatooine. Now, one thing that George Lucas should have followed from this Western game style guide is, it says here, you may not discuss anything of galactic significance which occurs prior to Star Wars A New Hope. This includes subjects about the Clone Wars, specifics about the Old Republic, how the Emperor rose to power, how the Rebellion stole the X-Wing prototype. Basically, it's saying, don't waste time on this kind of backstory, because it should have a little bit of mystery to it. Now, with that in mind, I will admit the Tales of the Jedi series were so far removed from the then current era of Star Wars that it wasn't really like going into the recent past, and thus it was a pretty good way of expanding the universe without losing the mystery of what we had already seen. The style guide continues by saying, no superlatives or absolutes. Don't make stuff the biggest or the best or the worst or most anything. You can make something big and impressive and nasty by sheer description. You may not use these absolute descriptions because somehow, somewhere, somebody will come up with something bigger and better. Yes, this is something that Star Killer Base anyone? One of the more important aspects of this style guide is saying, use the major players sparingly. Don't always have Darth Vader and the Emperor in your stories. Because the more you have these major characters as the chief character in your stories, the less they will be special and they become just simply normal. And the last aspect of this writing in Star Wars is be fluent in Star Wars. We all know that the guy who wrote Obi-Wan Kenobi was not fluent in Star Wars. The Western Game Style Guide says, know your Star Wars history and the universe. Basically, know what's going on in Star Wars before you write the bloody story. We're talking about being fluent in Star Wars, understanding what made it good, understanding what happened within the universe. Before you write anything, shouldn't you know what's going on? One of the things I want to point out about all of this is this got political at one point, and it was about how people generally ignore what's going on around them. At no time did Western Games say that you needed to make men feel uncomfortable. Hopefully now you see why the early EU for Star Wars was so great. This was the guideline. This was the bare minimum you had to do to make a Star Wars story, and this was why it was great. It was made by people who actually had a standard to work towards instead of some sort of ephemeral concept of equity. I'm General Lotz, and I'm going to wish you good Jedi, and good X-Wing Izar's Revenge, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.